If your photos aren't good enough, you aren't close enough. Or at least that's what the incredible documentary and war photographer Robert Capa said. But was he right? I think he was, but not how you might expect. I think there are a few different ways we can get closer, and they can have a massive impact on how we photograph, how our photos are viewed, and the stories they tell. Let me explain. So that we can understand exactly what old mate Capa meant, I think it's a good idea to try to understand him and his photography. Robert Capa was many things, but afraid of getting close was not one of them. He documented just a couple of wars, you know, the usual, including World War II, where he was one of the first, if not the first, photographer on Omaha Beach on D-Day, as well as the Spanish Civil War, where he took maybe one of the most famous war photos of all time, the falling soldier. There is now, 90 years later, of course, some debate as to whether or not that photo was staged, but that's for another video. Robert Capa went on to photograph the Soviet Union with his mate. His mate happened to be one of the greatest writers to have ever lived, John Steinbeck. He became a founding member of Magnum Photos. He played poker with Humphrey Bogart, and he documented the founding of Israel. Sadly, Robert Capa died at only 40 years old. He was documenting the First Indochina War, and he stepped on a landmine, so maybe don't get that close. All of that shows us that Robert Capa was not exactly a scaredy cat, but that's maybe the bit where people take his advice and bend it like that SD card you forgot you had in your back pocket. Speaking of, SD cards kinda suck, and sometimes the worst case scenario does happen. The camera dies halfway through recording, or you pull the card out before it's ejected all the way, and all of a sudden, your photos and videos are corrupted before you could even back them up in the first place. Don't worry, Wondershare RepairIt, the sponsor of today's video, is here to save the day. Over at Wondershare headquarters, they have a wizard locked in their dungeon, or at least that's my theory, because this software works so well, it may as well be magic. They've recently released version 6 of RepairIt, which doesn't just save your messed up photos, repair corrupt video clips and corrupt audio clips, but now it can also save your metadata, including gyro data, which is crucial for stabilization. Best of all, you can download it for free to try it out, so click on the first link in the video description and give it a go. Big thanks to Wondershare RepairIt for supporting today's video. I think we often assume that Robert Capa is just saying literally zoom with your feet and walk close, like get physically closer to the subject and fill that frame up. And that is great advice that I often parrot. One of the biggest challenges for new photographers is getting over the fear of getting close and using wider lenses, especially apropos to street and documentary stuff. Getting closer is a great way to shoot, not just because you're getting your subject larger in the frame, but also because you're getting them larger in your eyeballs. If you're closer, you can see all the details, all the little emotions, where people are looking, where they're moving their eyes, and it's those little details that can really make or break a fantastic photograph. Some of my favorite photography at the moment is all about getting close. I'm in my layering era. I'm layer maxing. I'm foreground pilled. Christabel Hara, Trent Park, Saul Leiter. These images are super inspiring to me right now. I love the foreground elements. It really makes it feel like the photos are like right there in the action, but it also makes the medium important. I really like photos that make it really obvious and force you to notice that it is a photo and that becomes a part of the experience. But Robert Capa, I suspect, meant all of that, but also to get closer in two more ways. If your photos aren't good enough, maybe you're not close enough emotionally, not just physically. See, when we're photographing from a place of closeness or maybe intimacy or at least meaning, we're gonna make different images. Maybe it's the things you notice, the things that you react to, the little gestures, subtle inside jokes, or maybe it's the way that you subconsciously depict people. I mean, if you regularly shoot candids, you'll know that 1 second between shutter presses can be the difference between somebody looking big and powerful and small and meek. Thing is, this is tricky for street photographers, right? Because we usually photograph strangers in public who we don't know. But I think it's important to remember that Capa didn't know every soldier he took a photo of either. He didn't know anything about them, let alone their whole life story, but he understood their conflict. He understood how important it was to them and what they were fighting for. For us on the street, we can achieve that emotional connection in a couple of different ways. On a micro level, a subtle gesture between friends or somebody wistfully brooding in a corner, or on a macro level. I think a lot of my favorite London work was shot in that transitional period between 2020 and 2021. And as London slowly came back to life, I just think you can feel that underlying theme of cautious optimism, of trying to reconstruct society and rebuild, especially when you view the photos in a series. Getting close emotionally is also going to change the way you edit and select your images. Sometimes you might want to tell a story in a very organic, authentic way. You might use film, or you might shoot with lower shutter speeds to introduce some motion blur and edit very subtly. Or you might want to really emphasize something and therefore use much heavier editing, more contrast and sharper images. And if you're not shooting street and you're doing more documentary work, this is even more important, since being close to your subjects puts them at ease. If you're documenting, for example, a band on tour, if you become a part of their little family and hang out with them and understand them, you'll inevitably get better photos because they're confident in your ability to know who they are and depict them as that. And you do know who they are, so you know what story you want to tell. I think the lack of this emotional closeness is why I've been leaning away from the funny juxtaposition style of street photography lately. It's great fun to shoot and it's incredible for learning fundamentals, but after a few years of focusing on shooting in that way, I feel like I have more I want to say with my photography now. I want to ask more questions and get a little bit more meaningful, but also explore more intentional artistic compositions instead of relying on running into somebody with a funny hat. I also want to create photography that has more impact on the audience that views it, which I think is the final way that Robert Capa wants us to get closer. I think one thing that street photographers especially should think way more about is who they're taking the photos for. Like everything in the arts, this might be a little bit controversial, but I think art is for sharing. And if you don't think about the people you want to share your photography with, you're missing a huge piece of the puzzle. Let's say you're documenting a subculture. We'll take street races as an example. Are the photos for the street racers to preserve their culture and history? Or are the photos for people who have never been to a street race to show them what it's like and share the love? It sounds obvious now, but those are two completely different sets of photos that require a completely different approach. And more than just knowing who your audience are, it might be a pretty good idea to think about how you want them to feel, what you want them to question. Simply put, how do you want them to react to the photos when they see them? Do you want to showcase the passion and dedication of the street racers and create a sense of wonder in the viewer? Or do you want to show the darker side of street racing, the late rent because it was spent on tires and the dangerous stunts they pull? I wouldn't know, obviously. I know it's a lot to think about, but I think you can always improve your photography even a little bit just by asking yourself, am I close enough? And what I mean by that is, can you walk closer? Can you zoom in emotionally? And do you know who the photos are for? Still though, maybe don't get as close as Robert Capa. We'll call it dedicated, but he was crazy. Thank you for watching. Stay hydrated and create art. Also, just quickly, thank you for 18,000 subscribers. That is incredible and it means the world to me. Go drink a glass of water right now.